terms of how they invest. I was present at the annual general meeting 2 years ago at CI, and they're very open about what their investment strategy was. And at that time, this is from recollection, so I could be wrong, but the information should be available online. I think about 20% of their investments were in foreign hedge funds of various kinds, which was reasonable for the time. This is 2 years ago. Another 40–50% were in maybe blue chip stocks, fairly, again, conservative instruments. So they had the typical spread that you would expect any prudent man to use in terms of determining investment strategy. Maybe 20–30% in fairly high return issues that were offering at that time about 20 or 30% return on investment. And then the majority in fairly stable instruments that don't return very much, and then another small chunk in sort of intermediate risk. And that's pretty much what Alcor has done. In fact, I would say that Alcor is probably a little more conservative in terms of how they actually invest patient capital money. Now, conservative meaning at the time, a lot of money was in real estate. And in the United States, real estate has contracted in value probably overall by about 30–40%. Regionally, as much as 60–70%. I don't know how bad it's been in the area that they've invested in, and it varies widely.
Well, I've been never been more pleased to be corrected in that case.
There's a question here as well.
I was just going to say that at the moment, sorry, try and get my ducks in a line. At the moment, having a cryogenic facility for storage in a liberal democracy with a stable track record like the United States is perfectly sensible. But I don't want to sound like a space cadet. I used to work for EADS Space as an engineer. They have, EADS Space as of today has technology for cryogenic systems in space with 10K Stirling closed cycle coolers. So you basically don't have to top up with liquid nitrogen, you just provide a power supply to keep the system recirculating. With something like that, which is actually described in Carl Sagan's book, Contact, the engineer in that puts himself in a canopic jar and flies off the character who actually dies in the movie. But in the book, he actually cryogenically preserves himself, not at the end of his life, but before that, and kind of disappears off on a trajectory that's designed as a free return. He basically sends himself off such that he will come back to the Earth in 10,000 years, basically, and enter a capture orbit. Sorry, I'm just saying that type of system is a closed system placed outside the Earth, away from political systems, completely isolated for a certain amount of time. And then what's the reason that someone will come and get you? Well, assuming the company still exists and you paid them, they will come and retrieve you. If the company doesn't exist, you're a historical resource. So what you might find is the historical AIs in the future or whatever decide to mine you for data, and as a side effect, they bring you back to life.
Well, most of that applies, will apply to the current system in place with the...
Yeah, I know, I wasn't saying, I was kind of saying it's a bit like the clock of the long now. The thing is that these discussions are fine for the next 200 years, but what do they cost? Stirling cycle coolers, and that, to be perfectly honest, the cost of manufacture, and they don't like saying too loudly, is probably not a huge amount of money. You're talking 200 or 300 quid per unit. It's the cost, it's the amortising the NRE and the fact they only make 10 a year or something at the moment. It's if you step up to mass production. Yeah, it's still the launch cost per unit. Yeah.
So there's some possible next generation cryonics technology. That's one thing we'll probably discuss.
Basically, immediately amortises all of the problems.
In orbit, if you can get off the Earth, once you're out of the gravity well, you don't need Stirling cycle. You just put yourself into a long trajectory orbit out around Pluto, and there you are.
Doesn't cost you $100 million.
I think the main problem with that would be wandering off to interesting trajectories involving nearby stars. For the animation, incidentally, some people do find this to be a major consideration. I personally don't think it's a huge issue. I'd rather be alive and poor than dead and loaded.
What about
however,
the main topic, earning money?
However, some people do look into creating a perpetual trust. To my knowledge, there are not really any perpetual trusts about that don't hit problems that somebody will poke a hole in them. But there are lawyers out there who will specialise in that kind of thing. Additionally, either a patient will be the first patient back or they won't. And if they're the first patient back, then they're an international celebrity, they really don't have any problems. And if they're not, then they're already cryonicists who have been reanimated, and there'll doubtlessly by then be some system in place for assisting with that. Certainly if the major developed nations' welfare states are anything to go on, I think I could live off the dole and be alive rather than be dead. And that is even if money itself is still operating in the same fashion at the moment. There are two major possibilities with regards to money, aside from the obvious possibility of things continuing as they are, with an economic ups and downs gradually cycling, which is one that we will outgrow money sociologically, in the sense that we are able to make systems that work and function without a necessity for money. The flip side of that is we are forced to do the above by global economic collapse. Now, global economic collapse is, again, not an ideal situation. However, it's interesting to note that the end result of a global economic collapse would be essentially a barter economy, whether that's physical items or services. Compare that to the bright side possibility there of humanity outgrowing money and developing systems that don't require it. It's essentially, it comes down to the same thing to a degree. Whether it's because we now have technologies that can provide all the extra resources, or whether it's just the simple fact that we need to go about different methods to get them. One of those two possibilities is by necessity what would happen if money doesn't continue the way it is. And of course, if it does continue, then that's where the perpetual trust funds come in. It's not really a problem that I personally have a hard and fast solution to, because there is so much that is up in the air with regards to the next 6 months of finance in the world, never mind the next 50 to 100 years. However, it is something that people are looking into. What about brain death issue? There are constant pieces of information passed around us, fact, which is that brain death is irreversible and occurs after X period of time. A lot of people don't seem to be able to agree, however, on how long X period of time is. According to, now let me remember my source correctly, it was either Life Extension magazine or Kurzweil, but something of that ilk. The 5 hours at room temperature is now where irreversible brain death occurs. That is to say, information theoretic death. That is the point where things have actually started to break down. Before then, it's simply a matter of, the electrical impulses aren't flowing how they should. Vitrification isn't going to do any wonders for the individual synapses in the brain. Autopsy involving slicing the brain definitely isn't going to do any wonders for that either. This is a problem that is likely to require frankly does require a solution that we simply do not have yet. This is one area where we're not there yet. The way I view this is an intelligent version of Pascal's gamble. Either we will develop technology capable of reversing that damage, or we won't. If we do, then I bet on the right horse and I'm able to reap the rewards. If they don't, I will absolutely be no less dead than if no more dead than if I hadn't tried. The same argument exactly applies to freezing damage, with the exception that freezing damage is less of an issue to the rest of the body, for the simple reason that the rest of the body isn't as complex, essentially, as the brain is easier to repair with contemporary science, never mind with nanotechnology. If there's been an ideal cryopreservation, ideally a vitrification, there's going to be very limited. I say very limited. I mean,